Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our very first Committee of Adjustment meeting in 2.5 years. I have to change my preamble a little bit. So on that note, if you're here in person and you have a cell phone, I'm going to ask you to turn your ringer off. And if your phone does ring when you're here, we'll just ask you to answer it when you're beyond earshot. Now, members of the public with us this evening who have a particular interest in any application, please be sure to put your name and address in the sign-up sheets at the back of the room. So I'm now required to read the following notice, so bear with me. So the notice for the applications we review this evening will only be forwarded to those who have either presented a written request for the decision or to those who have recorded their name and address on the form provided at the back of the room. Furthermore, a formal request is necessary to be advised of a possible Ontario Land Tribunal hearing on these matters and in order to be allowed to make a presentation to the Ontario Land Tribunal, otherwise known as the OLT. So if you are following in remotely and you'd like to be notified of any decision or any appeals that may result, then please send an email to our Secretary Treasurer, Lindsay Stamen. Her email address is lsthamann@cityofkingston.ca. Be sure to include your full name and your address and the file number of the application. So now I'd like to share with you the 5-part format that I'm going to be using as we navigate through the applications this evening. In the first part, I will start by introducing the application. Now, if you are the applicant or the agent, please come up to there's a speaker panel over to the right-hand side. You can come up there just before we call you, and you'll have an opportunity to add anything further to the application. In step number 2, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions of either the applicant or the agent. And then I'll open the public portion of the meeting in step number 3. Now, members of the public can come up to the speaker stand or raise their virtual hand in Zoom if you're following along from home. And when I recognize you, I'm going to ask you to identify yourself by name and address for the record, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions or make any comments. Now, during this public portion of the meeting, don't expect a response to your questions or your comments, because it's only during the public portion of the meeting where we record the questions and comments, and it's only after I close the public portion of the meeting will the questions and comments be addressed by the applicant, the agent, or staff. And to be sure, I'll be calling 3 times for public comments before I close the public portion of the meeting. In the 4th step, I'll give the applicant, their agent, or staff an opportunity to address the public comments. And then in the 5th and final step, I'll turn the meeting over to the committee where we will deliberate on the application and make an ultimate decision. And then we rinse and we repeat. I'll be using the same format for every application this evening. So that's about it. So at this point, I'll call on Ian to confirm quorum.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can confirm we do have quorum. Currently absent from the meeting are Blaine Fudge and Jordan Takanos-Levy.
Great, thanks very much. So at this point, I'll call the meeting to order at 5:33 p.m. and refer you to the agenda. Okay, so everybody's received the agenda. You've had an opportunity to go through it. So can I call for a motion to approve the agenda? So moved by Paul and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that is unanimously carried. Okay, next is confirmation of the minutes from the August 15th meeting. Everybody's had a chance to go through them, right? So can I have a call for a motion to approve them? So moved by Paul and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that is unanimously carried. Thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? And I see 4 shaking heads, so there are none. We have no delegations. We have no requests for deferral. There are no returning deferred items, so we have our first piece of new business, which is for 40 Hyperion Court. So Beth, can I have you read this into the record, please? It's Lindsay, sorry. Oh, is Lindsay with us? Oh, hey, Lindsay, good to see you. Okay. I could have you read that into the record, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our first application tonight is for minor variance at 40 Hyperion Court. The file number associated with the application is D13045-2022. Niall Odie will give a presentation on behalf of the city for this application.
Great, thanks and welcome.
Just confirming that everyone can hear me this evening?
Very well, yes, thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Ms. Stamen, and through you, Mr. Chair. As Lindsay mentioned, this is minor variance application for 40 Hyperion Court. The purpose and effect of this application is to enable a daycare center as a complementary use within the Business Park M1 zone of the new Kingston zoning bylaw 2022-62. And to reduce the minimum number of loading spaces from 2 spaces down to 1 space. To ensure that employment uses remain the primary use in the M1 zone, the complementary use will be limited to 25% of the gross floor area of the building. Next slide, please. The subject property is located in the southeast corner of Lappins Lane and Hyperion Court within the Alcan Business Park. The surrounding land uses are generally composed of professional offices and limited light industrial uses, with a residential neighborhood located farther to the east. The property is currently developed with a single-story office building, which is approximately 50% occupied by professional office, with the remaining 50% being vacant. The property is designated Business Park Industrial in the official plan and zoned Business Park in the new Kingston zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. The applicant proposes to use 25% of the gross floor area of the building for the purposes of a daycare center. This is not a permitted use within the M1 zone in the new Kingston zoning bylaw, but the M1 zone does allow complementary uses to be established through a minor variance in accordance with the policies of the official plan and the Planning Act. The Business Park Industrial designation in the official plan does identify daycare centers as a complementary use, provided they are located appropriately and conform to official plan policies. Accordingly, the applicant has submitted a minor variance application to establish the daycare center use, subject to a 25% floor area maximum, as this process is contemplated in both the official plan and the new Kingston zoning bylaw. The applicant has also requested a second variance, which is to reduce the loading spaces from 2 to 1. This is to recognize the existing loading space on the property and which is anticipated to be sufficient for the 2 professional offices that will occupy the lands and the daycare center use. It's important to note that the application does not seek relief from the current zoning bylaw 8499, where daycare center is not identified as a permitted use and complementary uses cannot be established through a minor variance application. As such, any approval associated with this application would only come into effect when the relevant portions of the new Kingston zoning bylaw come into effect. Next slide, please. This slide shows the anticipated site plan for the property, which demonstrates that approximately 40 parking spaces in the southern portion of the site would be transitioned to create 3 fenced-in outdoor play areas to support the daycare use. These parking spaces are not required in the new Kingston zoning bylaw. The applicant will be required to submit a subsequent site plan control application to undertake these conversions, during which time the municipality will ensure that the site safety and functionality are maintained. Next slide, please. The dark blue shaded areas shown on this slide would be the floor area devoted to the daycare center use, which would be limited to 25% of the gross floor area of the building. This floor plan confirms that the remaining 75% of the building would be used for professional offices, which ensures that the property will be used predominantly for employment uses moving forward. Next slide, please. Pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, a notice of statutory public meeting was provided by advertisement in the form of signs posted on the subject site 10 days in advance of the meeting. In addition, notices were sent by mail to property owners within 60 meters of the subject lands, and a courtesy notice was placed in the Kingston Whig Standard. Staff have not received any inquiries from members of the public relating to this minor variance application. Next slide, please. With respect to the recommendation, it is being recommended for approval subject to the proposed conditions as outlined in the staff report before committee this evening. The requested variances maintain the general intent and purpose of both the official plan and the new Kingston zoning bylaw when it comes into effect. The proposal is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land and is considered minor. There are no adverse effects anticipated on adjacent properties or the proposed daycare center use itself, which will be further confirmed through the noise study recommended as a condition of approval for this minor variance and implemented through the subsequent site plan control application. This concludes the staff presentation for minor variance application D13-045-2022, and I would be pleased to answer any questions from the committee or members of the public.
Great. Thanks very much, Niall. Okay, so at this point, do we have the applicant, or can we have the applicant or their agent identify themselves by name and address, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Nanton. I live at 1339 Waterside Way in Kingston, Ontario. I am a senior planner with FO10 Planning and Design, and I am present today on behalf of the applicant, the BGC, or Boys and Girls Club, as many of us know them by.
Good, thanks. Thanks very much. Is there anything further you wish to add to the application we have before us?
No, other than we agree with the recommendation and the findings of the staff report, and appreciate staff giving a detailed presentation this evening. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or the agent? And I see a bunch of no shaking heads, so I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 40 Hyperion Court? If so, raise your physical hand or your virtual hand in Zoom. Is anybody in the gallery? 3 members, okay. I'll call a second time. Is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 40 Hyperion Court? Please raise your physical hand or virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, do we have anybody with us this evening who wishes to speak to the application for 40 Hyperion Court? Please raise your physical hand or virtual hand in Zoom. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Greg and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion on this? No, everybody's shaking heads, so I'll call for the vote. All in favor, raise your physical hands. And that's unanimously carried. Yep, thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Okay, the next application we have is for 108 Helen Street. And Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an application for minor variance, file number D13-039-2022 at 108 Helen Street. Anne-Marie Eusebio will give the presentation for this application.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public. The minor variance application presented before you this evening is for the property municipally addressed as 108 Helen Street. The purpose and effect is to request relief from the maximum residential building depth and to permit the construction of a rear addition. Relief is also required from the interior side yard width with respect to projections into yards to replace an existing deck. Next slide, please. The following are the requested variances under bylaw 8499. The requirement for the residential building depth is 10.95 meters, and the proposed is 11.25 meters. We are also looking at the projections into yards for the interior side yard setback. The requirement is 0.6 meters. The variance requested is 0.6 meters as well. Next slide, please. The following is the requested variance under bylaw 2022-62 for the provisions for decks and porches for the interior side yard. So the requirement is 0.6 meters for his variance requested of 0.6. The proposal with respect to the rear addition will meet the building depth requirements under the urban residential 5 zone under zoning bylaw 2022-62. Next slide, please. The lot is currently developed with a 1.5-story single detached dwelling within an established residential community within the Sunnyside neighborhood in the central area of Kingston. The immediate area mainly consists of single detached dwellings with some parkland uses nearby. Next slide, please. The subject site is designated as residential in the official plan and is zoned 1-family dwelling and 2-family dwelling A zone under zoning bylaw 8499. The property is located within the urban residential 5 zone in the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. Next slide, please. This is the site plan for the subject property. The proposal is to construct a new rear addition which will match the existing roof line of the 1.5-story single-family dwelling. The proposed addition will accommodate for more living space on the ground floor and an additional bedroom on the second floor for a total of 3 bedrooms in the expanded dwelling. The existing rear deck will be also removed and replaced with a new deck, which will have a similar footprint and height as a portion of the deck on the north side of the property. Next slide, please. This is an elevation drawing showing the front of the dwelling. Next slide, please. This is the elevation drawing which illustrates the view that would be observed from the neighboring property to the north, located at 112 Helen Street. There is an existing fence along the northern property line, which will mitigate privacy or visual intrusion issues. Next slide, please. This elevation drawing illustrates the view that would be observed from the neighboring property to the south, located at 104 Helen Street. The proposed addition and deck will not create any loss of privacy, intrusive overlook, or shadowing issues. The proposal provides appropriate separation from neighboring properties. Next slide, please. This elevation drawing indicates the proposed addition from the rear of the property. The proposed rear addition exceeds the required rear yard width of 7.5 meters, which will not cause adverse effects to the rear of the abutting properties along Alamein Drive. The proposed development will be compatible with existing residential development along Helen Street in terms of scale, style, massing, and color. The addition will enhance the overall functionality of the residential building through interior renovations and expansion of existing living space, and there will be no significant impacts on the streetscape. The proposed building depth will also result in a development that is similar to the built form of existing dwellings on the neighboring properties north of the subject site, mainly 112 and 116 Helen Street. Next slide, please. With respect to public consultation, signs were posted on the subject site 10 days in advance of the meeting. Notices were mailed out to a number of 27 properties within 60 meters of the subject property. A courtesy notice was placed in the Kingston Wood Standard, and to date, no correspondence has been received. Next slide, please. With respect to our recommendation, the requested variances maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan, zoning bylaw 8499, and the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. Proposal is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land, and as such, the proposed application meets all 4 tests under the Planning Act and recommended for approval. Thank you very much for your time, and that concludes my presentation, and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Can I now call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address, please?
Hello, my name is Ashley Osmer with NBS Design Group, and our business address is 77 Princess Street, Kingston, Ontario.
Great, thanks and welcome. And do you have anything further you wish to add to the application this evening?
Thank you. Nothing further to Anne Marie's presentation.
Okay, so committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? I'm seeing shaking heads, so I'll go open up the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 108 Helen Street? Please raise your physical hand or virtual hand in Zoom. I'm seeing none. I'll call my second time. Is anybody with us this evening in person or online who is interested in the application for 108 Helen Street? Please let yourself be known. And my third and final call, do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 108 Helen Street? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom or your physical hand in here, and I see none. So I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Greg and seconded by Paul. Any discussion? Yes, Greg.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the map, 31 Alamean Drive was a unit that came up in the August meeting for the Committee of Adjustment. I believe there's going to be an addition added on there, which is basically, 2 doors down on the opposite side of this property, which is looks as though it's going to be doing an addition as well. I don't know about timelines or anything, but I just figured I would point out for city staff that if constructions occur at the same time or on about the same time, you have 2 properties within a close vicinity of each other doing work. And that's all I wanted to mention.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. I'm sure staff will take note. I see Anna Marie shaking her head. Okay. All right, so any other comments? So I'll call the vote. All in favor, raise your physical hands. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you. All right, and so our next application, number 3, is for 880 Steventown Lane. Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Next is an application for minor variance at 880 Steventown Lane. The file number is D13043-2022, and Jason Partridge will give the presentation for this application.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, welcome, Jason.
So through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance at 880 Steventown Lane. Next slide, please. The purpose and effect of the minor variance application is to request relief from the requirements regarding the maximum lot area and yard location provision to construct a 1-story detached front yard accessory building. The resulting new accessory building will be 139.4 square meters in size and complies with all minimum height and landscape open space requirements. Next slide, please. The application is requesting 3 variances. The first variance is for the maximum lot area, which is capped at 200 square meters. The proposed is 300. For the total proposed, which includes the accessory building, sheds on the property, and also the main single-family dwelling, it is proposed at 311 square meters, and the variance requested is 111.1 square meters. The second variance is to represent the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. It's exact same provisions. The maximum is 200. The proposed is 311.1, and the variance requested is 101.1 square meters. The third variance is for the new zoning bylaw yard provision. The request is for the front yard. Next slide, please. The subject property at 880 Steventown Lane is located north of the 401 along Highway 15. Steventown Lane comes off Highway 15, and to the west of it is the Rideau Canal. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan at 880 Steventown Lane. At the bottom right-hand corner shows the proposed detached accessory building. And this is the proposed location for it. Next slide, please. The requested variances maintain the general intent and purpose of both the City of Kingston official plan and zoning bylaw 3274 and 2022-62. The proposal is desirable and appropriate development or use of the land, building, or structure, and requested variance is minor in nature. As such, the proposed application meets all four tests of subsection 45(1). The Planning Act and the application is being recommended for approval subject to the proposed conditions. Approval of this application will allow the construction of a one-story accessible building within the front yard of the property. As of this time, we also have received no public comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Jason. So at this point, I'd like to call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address, please.
Steve Carquez, 880 Stephentown Lane.
Okay, so welcome. And is there anything further you wanted to add to the application we have before us?
There was a question. One of the recommendations or stipulations there that were put in was archaeological dig.
Okay, yes.
I believe if you
Just
can
let me
see.
back up, just get oriented on that. Yeah, the archaeological condition to have an archaeological assessment.
Right.
Yes.
So it's zoned RR1 rural residential with no designation to any historical or heritage significance. Now, the existing where the proposed garage is going to be, it is completely over a disturbed site as well. As the excavation for the septic system was there, put in 2 years ago by myself, and previous owners, with say 80% of the portion of this garage being over an existing driveway with a 2.5-foot granular packed base gravel. Another thing I want to bring up is to the south of me, there was a couple applicants within the last 3 years as of recent that have had minor variances for the same reasons for lot coverages and stuff, and they did not need a archaeological dig, not one, but in 2 different, possibly 3 different instances. So I just wanted to clarify the inaccuracy of this policy that's in place. Why am I any different from the other 2? You know what I mean?
Okay, sure. Okay, anything further you want to add at this point?
I should be up.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much. All right, so committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? None? Yes, yeah, Greg?
Are we able to get staff to maybe, is staff able to give a response to what he has to say or maybe make a comment? I mean, one
Yeah.
way or the other?
Jason, do you want to, oh, Tim, you'd like to, Tim Parks, address that?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The reason that condition forms part of the approval is the master plan indicates that the subject property, it does have composite archaeological potential. Therefore, a clearance is required as an OP policy. To the applicant's comments that there are situations where some of his neighbors haven't required that. What is triggering variance, which in order to approve the variance, it has to be in compliance with official plan policies. Because he is requesting over 200 meters squared on his property, that's what's triggered this. Some of the abutting properties did not meet that threshold, therefore it did not trigger this requirement. Heritage Services also identified that other composite archaeological significant finds have been found in the local area. That is again why the request has been made. If there has been some previous work done on the surface, it may not have gone down far enough to expose that. Thank you.
Okay, yep. Any other questions of the applicant or staff? I kind of just have one for clarification. Are you saying the area that you want to excavate has already been previously disturbed? 100% of it or just a part of it?
Fully.
And to what extent has it been excavated?
Well, we put a septic system in with 380 feet of pipes, which had been excavated, obviously, below 2 feet below grade. Personally done that myself with 0 findings. And then the driveway right onto the side of it, literally 6-8 feet away from the septic system, has been dug down, which is below what I'm proposing to put down to begin with. So if I put a slab on grade down, everything that I'm putting it on top of has already been disturbed, 100%.
So the slab on grade you're proposing to put down, is it on fresh undisturbed soil?
It would be on recently disturbed, yes.
Recently disturbed soil, just to confirm, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, my septic system was put in as of 2 years ago, and the driveway would have been done sometime before that.
Okay. Okay, all right, thanks for that. Yes, Greg?
Yeah, for the applicant. I would just like to ask you, obviously don't have to answer if you don't want to, but is there like any other reason other than the inconvenience of having the archaeological assessment being done, i.e. the time that it would take to do it, or any other issues that you have with having to have one done? Just from the point, whereas, you know, at face value, it's just like, okay, you're gonna have an archaeological assessment done, that, you know what, it takes a little bit of time, but if the time's not an issue, but are the issues like the cost, or is it just the time, or is it, you know, what, can I maybe just inquire a little bit about the specifics of it?
So I started this process, which I was under the understanding it was a simple process to apply for a secondary outbuilding with no water, no hydrogeological, you know, I live in a 1,200 square foot house with 4 kids. We got all kinds of toys, stuff's out in the rain, et cetera, et cetera. But we started this process 14 months ago. I mean, you know, I'm not building the plutonium bomb, I'm building the garage. You know, I got a professional surveyor because what I hand sketched with an irregular property wasn't, you know, sufficient or accurate. You know, I shelled out the money. The money's not the problem. I can't get anybody this field season. It's in the next field season. Now you're talking of a 2-year drag plus. You know, I'm $14,000 and 14 months into it for something that should be semi-simple, considering what's been done around me before, previous, regardless of, you know, the substantial size and whatnot, you know what I mean? It's irrelevant, like when I can dig up and put a septic system in, that's 50% bigger than what I'm proposing with nothing even brought up to it. I guess that's fine, you know what I mean, through the Ministry of Ontario. I just don't know where these guidelines here situate. You know, I can put a septic system in with no red flags, rip it up with an excavator, put my pipes, and that's fine and dandy. Now, if it was completely undisturbed, which I completely understand that, if I cleared a forest or had a, you know, big swath of property, you know, a hayfield by the water, example, or whatever the case may be, 100%. But what I'm proposing is not like we're on a virgin piece of land. I can, with my own eyes, 100% confirm that this thing has already been ripped minimum 2 to 2.5 feet deep, further than what I'm proposing to put on it. And that's...
Yeah, I appreciate that being noted. Thank you.
And thanks, Tim?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. To the applicant's comments, I think from the time he started this process, he was made aware an archaeological assessment would be a requirement. And in discussion with staff, this information of the area of the septic being disturbed and where you are planning to put your accessory building is coming as new information before staff this evening.
Oh, okay.
So what I would suggest is if the applicant wishes, we could have this deferred. He can have, we can request heritage staff to visit the site and determine the amount of disturbance to the land. But because we were unaware of this previous disturbance, it was not brought to our attention previously. It couldn't be taken into consideration.
That's an excellent suggestion. If you're happy with that, to defer this to a later date, maybe even the next meeting, or?
What would be the timeline for that, you're
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to check with the availability of Heritage Services to be able to go out and conduct the site visit, but I don't imagine it would be more than a matter of a few weeks.
Okay, so we have an option, rather than defer to the October meeting, we would defer sine die, which means to some future date. We'd be able to get you on the agenda post haste, like in a very quick period of time. Is it 90 days? Oh, really? Okay. Has that changed? Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so we'd have you back within 90 days. We could defer it and you'd be back at some point within 90 days, which would be more than enough time for Heritage to review.
Yeah, if they were to review it within the next few weeks potentially,
Yep.
could we, like, what's the 90 day? I'm just so I get my head around things. Just like my reason of thinking, sort of cutting you off, it's, frost, winter,
Sure.
Just horrible building conditions.
Yeah.
If this gentleman here is, nice enough to, look into it or send somebody there to do an on-site assessment, is there any way we can kind of do this sooner than 90 days possibly?
Yes, Tim.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 90 days is referring to a legislative requirement having to report back to this committee. I'm fairly confident I can ask my colleagues in Heritage Services to be able to go undertake a site visit. As I said, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks. I can't commit that visit myself because it's not my department, but I can certainly speak to my co-director of Heritage Services and ask that they conduct a site visit to make that determination.
Perfect.
Yeah. That works.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so what do we need then? Motion to defer? Well, public?
First we need to vote the public.
Okay, yep. All right, so, okay, any other questions of the applicant or staff? None. So I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Is anybody with us this evening to speak to the application for 880 Steventown Lane? I know there's nobody in here, but there might be some people online. Are you with us this evening interested in the application for 880 Steventown Lane? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call, do we have anybody wishing to speak to the application for 880 Steventown Lane? Raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. Okay, Greg? Motion to?
Motion to defer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Specifically to the next meeting or?
Within reason of, I think time has been an issue at this point. We want to kind of get this.
Okay, December.
I get the sense that he would like to try and get this moving, but city staff is also under a lot of pressure as
Yes.
well. But to defer as soon as possible.
Okay.
To the next possible date that we can get this
So-
done with respect to everybody.
Thanks. So the clerk has just informed me that the Monday, December 12th would be the most reasonable date to defer to?
That would be,
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be the latest date we could
The
defer it to.
latest.
The next committee meeting is October the 17th.
Right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what date do we have in November then? Is it okay to ask?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it should be Monday, the 21st of November.
So through you, Mr. Chair, may I request to everybody that maybe we could put it on that, for that date? And if something were to arise, we could collectively work together to maybe see if something else could be
To
done,
bump
but
it?
that date.
Do you think that's reasonable? Okay. Just one moment, we're just, so can we have a friendly amendment perhaps to your motion that we defer it no later than December 12th?
Yes,
And that if it can come back earlier, then it will be on the agenda?
that seems reasonable, yes.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Do we have somebody to second that? All right, so seconded by Vincent. So All right, any discussion? I think this is in the best interest of everybody, so I think it's a kind of a win-win. So all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. Thanks. So we'll see you back no later than December 12th, maybe even in the November meeting, and because it's a returning deferred item, you'd be the first one on the agenda. So, okay, thanks. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, you take that? Okay, good. All right, now our final application this evening is for 774 Riverview Way. So Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our last application tonight is an application for minor variance at 744 Riverview Way. The file number is D13-046-2022, and I will give the presentation for this application.
Great, thanks and welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this application is to construct a new deck. That deck is going to be more than 1.2 meters above finished grade and exceeds the maximum permitted 30 square meters in area. Next slide, please. So here we see the key map and the neighborhood context map. The property is surrounded by other residential uses, except to the rear of the lot, which is a protected natural area. The deck is proposed in the rear yard. Next slide, please. The zone provisions for maximum area of the deck are the same in both the current zoning bylaw 3274 and the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. The bylaw permits a maximum area of 30 square meters, and the proposed deck is 42 square meters, and the stairs are 9 square meters. So adding these two numbers together, we get the total requested variance for 51 square meters. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're seeing the site plan. The proposed deck, as I said, will be located on the rear of the existing single-family home. Currently, there is no deck on the rear of this house. The lot slopes down towards the rear lot line, which creates walkout basements for this lot and the other homes along this stretch of Riverview Way. The height of the proposed deck is required in order to provide access to the rear doors on the main floor. And the width of this deck is also required to connect the two rear doors because there will be two doors that lead out onto this deck. The proposed deck does comply with all setbacks and other requirements of the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So a sign was posted, notice was mailed, and an ad was placed in the WIG standard. We have not received any public comments for this application. Next slide, please. The planning department recommends approval of this application subject to the proposed conditions. And I leave this in your hands, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks very much, Lindsay. So at this point, can I call on the applicant or their agent to identify yourself by name and address for our record, please? Oh, you got to unmute.
Sorry about that, Chair.
It's all good. Yeah.
Colin Youngman, owner of, along with my spouse, of 744 Riverview Way.
Great. Is there anything further you want to add to the application, Colin?
No, there is not.
Okay, so I'll come back to the committee now and ask committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? None at all. Everybody shaking their heads. So I'll now open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 744 Riverview Way? Raise your virtual hand in Zoom. I'm seeing none. I'll call a second time. Do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 744 Riverview Way? Raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And my third and final call is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 744 Riverview Way, raise your virtual hand. Zoom, I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Greg and seconded by Vincent. Any discussion? Everybody's shaking their head, none. So all in favor, raise your physical hands. And that's unanimously carried. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the new business. Onto the agenda, we have no new motions this evening, no notices of motion, there's no other business, and we have no correspondence. The date of the next meeting is set for Monday, October 17th at 5:30 p.m. And I guess now we're just looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Greg, seconded by Paul. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. So meeting is adjourned at 6:15 p.m. Thanks, everybody. See you next month.